I checked off the last item on the pre-dive checklist and double-tapped my stylus against the tablet screen to log the timestamp. 6 hours of prep work for what would be the deepest manned descent in human history. No pressure. Literally all the pressure. About 16,000 pounds per square inch where we were headed. Primary life support, check. Secondary life support, check. Emergency oxygen reserves, check. I muttered, more for my own benefit than anyone else's. The Abyss Voyager wasn't just any submersible. She was a technological marvel designed specifically for the crushing depths of the Mariana Trench, with a reinforced titanium ceramic composite hull that could withstand pressures no human had ever survived. 10 feet away, Beverly hunched over her workstation, fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the communications array. Her face held that intense concentration I'd come to respect over our 3 years working together, the kind that made interrupting her feel like a federal offense. "Randy," she said without looking up, her accent barely detectable. "Confirm data transmission pathways are clear. I'm seeing minor interference on channel 6. I pulled up the diagnostic panel and ran a quick system check. Switching to backup frequency should clear up the noise. The readout flashed green, and I nodded. "We're good now. All channels open." "Thank you." 2 words, clinically delivered. That was Beverly in work mode, brilliant, efficient, and about as emotionally expressive as our depth gauges. Heavy footsteps approached from behind, and I turned to see Lucas making his way toward us across the launch deck. His weathered face broke into a rare smile, which immediately put me on alert. Captain Roberts wasn't known for excessive cheerfulness. "Hudson," he said, nodding as he approached. "Weather reports just came in. We've got a 5-day window of calm seas, best conditions we could hope for. Barometric pressures holding steady." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "That's good news. Last thing we need is to be fighting surface chop during recovery." The worst scenarios always played in the back of my mind: submersible damage during retrieval, communications lost during ascent, oxygen systems failing at 18,000 feet below. My job was to anticipate disaster before it happened. "Christina asked me to pass along a request," Lucas continued, pulling me from my mental catastrophe reel. "She wants you to prioritize bioacoustic data collection once you reach the Twilight Zone. Apparently there's some new whale vocalization pattern she's tracking." I made a note on my tablet. "Not a problem. We've got the upgraded hydrophones installed. Tell her we'll start recording at 2,000 feet. "Will do. You've got the best ears in the deep, Hudson. That's why she asked for you specifically." Lucas glanced over at the submersible, his expression growing serious again. "How's she looking?" "The Voyager's in perfect condition. We've run every test twice." Charles approached from the submersible, wiping his hands on a rag. His perpetual scowl had softened slightly, which in Richardson speak meant everything was excellent. "Final systems check complete," he reported, voice clipped and precise. "Hull integrity at 100%. Ballast systems responsive. Life support redundancies all green." He hesitated, then added, "She's ready, Randy." I nodded, feeling the weight of what we were about to attempt. The 4 of us stood looking at the Abyss Voyager, a 22-foot capsule that resembled a high-tech white pill with viewing ports and mechanical arms. Billions in research and development, thousands of hours of engineering, and it all came down to the next 24 hours. "Time to suit up," I said. 40 minutes later, Beverly and I were sealed inside the Voyager's cabin, strapped into our acceleration couches as the launch team prepared for deployment. Through the comms, I heard the countdown begin. Deployment in 3, 2, 1. The hydraulic lift engaged with a low hum, and I felt the submersible rise slightly before moving laterally over the launch bay. The sensation of hanging suspended over empty ocean brought a familiar tightness to my chest. Not quite fear, more like awareness. We were leaving the known world behind. Commencing lowering sequence. Charles's voice came through crisp in my headset. The first jolt as we were lowered made Beverly glance over at me, one eyebrow raised slightly. I gave her a reassuring nod. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about. The Voyager descended slowly, swaying slightly as the massive ocean swells rocked the Horizon Pioneer above us. Water closed over the top viewport, and I watched bubbles stream past as we submerged. The research vessel grew smaller against the morning sky, its white hull bright against the blue. From our perspective, it looked like the ship was rising rather than us sinking, a disorienting illusion I'd never quite gotten used to. I switched to the external comms. Control, this is Hudson. We've begun our descent. All systems nominal. Copy that, Voyager, came the reply from the ship. You are clear for dive protocol Alpha. Godspeed. Sonar systems functioning within optimal parameters, Beverly reported beside me, her voice steady as she confirmed readings. Lena, please verify reception on your end. Confirming full sonar functionality, Lena's voice responded from the control room above. We're receiving your telemetry. Signal strength excellent. I monitored the temperature sensors as we passed through the first 100 meters. The change was gradual but measurable. 72 degrees at the surface, dropping to 65, then lower with each passing minute. The pressure gauges showed increasing values, though we were still in what amounted to the kiddie pool compared to where we were headed. The bright blue of the surface waters began to fade as we descended deeper. At 500 feet, the sunlight filtering through the water took on that ethereal, diffused quality that always made me think of cathedral light. By 800 feet, the color had shifted to a deeper blue, and I could see the first signs of the twilight zone approaching below us. Passing through 1,000 feet, I announced, checking the depth readout. Entering the twilight zone. The ocean darkened around us, the sun's reach fading with every meter we descended. What had been bright azure was now a deepening indigo, with the first hints of true darkness below. I adjusted the external lighting to compensate, illuminating the waters immediately surrounding our vessel. The beams caught occasional flashes of silver as small fish darted away from our intrusion. I felt it then, that first genuine flutter of excitement in my chest. We were just at the beginning, with the true abyss still miles below, but already the sense of discovery was taking hold. No one had ever taken a submersible like the Voyager to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. No one had ever seen what we would see today. Beyond the mundane checklist items and system readouts, beyond the practiced professionalism, I couldn't help but feel like an explorer venturing into an alien world. We were on our way to the deepest part of the ocean, a place more remote and inaccessible than the surface of the moon. The deeper we descended, the more the darkness pressed in. I monitored the depth gauge as it ticked steadily downward. 7,000 feet, 8,000, 9,000. The external temperature sensors registered a bone-chilling 34 degrees Fahrenheit, while our cabin maintained a comfortable 68. Outside our reinforced viewport, the black was nearly absolute, broken only by occasional bioluminescent creatures that drifted like living stars through our light beams. Control, Voyager, depth 10,000 feet and descending, all systems nominal, I reported, keeping my voice even. This was our 5th status check since entering the mesopelagic zone. The routine helped anchor me as we sank into realms few humans had ever witnessed. Voyager Control, we copy. Telemetry stable. You're right on target, came the response, slightly distorted by the increasing water pressure. Lena, her full name was Beverly, but she'd gone by Lena since her university days, tapped at her sonar console. The soft blue glow illuminated her face in the dim cabin. "Adjusting frequency range," she said, without looking up. "I want to capture any anomalous signatures as we cross the abyssal threshold." I nodded, checking our descent rate. 4.2 meters per minute. We're making good time. The hours passed in a strange rhythm of system checks, data logging, and quiet observation. At hour 3, we passed through a layer of gelatinous organisms that scattered like smoke in our lights. Lena captured everything, her fingers dancing across the equipment panels as if playing a complex instrument. Control Voyager, passing 27,000 feet. Hull integrity holding at 100%. Power reserves at 82%. I reported at the 4-hour mark. Time behaved differently down here. Without the sun's movement to track the hours, only our instruments and the steady tick of the digital clock reminded us of its passage. I found myself checking the reinforced hull plates more frequently as the pressure mounted. The Voyager had been designed for this, tested in pressure chambers and computer simulations, but theory and reality were different beasts. 5 hours, I noted as we approached our target depth. Control Voyager, we're at 35,900 feet and closing on final position. Copy that, Voyager. You're about to make history. Lucas's voice came through, sounding tinny and far away. I allowed myself a brief smile at that. We weren't the first to reach these depths, but we were the first with this equipment and these research objectives. The Abyss Voyager represented the cutting edge of deep-sea exploration technology. The depth gauge read 35,140 feet, 10,125 meters. We had arrived at our designated position in the Challenger Deep. "Beginning buoyancy adjustments," I announced, working the ballast controls with careful precision. Too much change too quickly could send us bouncing up or down hundreds of feet. "Neutralizing for station keeping." Outside, our powerful external lights cut through the darkness in blue-white cones, revealing a landscape alien and austere. The seafloor wasn't visible yet. We were maintaining our position in the water column as planned, but I could see marine snow drifting through our lights. Tiny particles of organic matter, dead plankton, fecal pellets, mucus, fell like a gentle blizzard, carrying carbon from the surface world to the ocean floor in a process that had continued uninterrupted for billions of years. I stared at those floating particles, acutely aware of the crushing pressure surrounding us. 16,000 pounds pressed against every square inch of our hull, a pressure that would collapse a human body instantly if exposed. Our breathing, our movement, our very existence down here depended entirely on the integrity of the Voyager's design. "We're stable at target depth," I confirmed after triple-checking our positioning. "How's it looking?" Lena looked up from her instruments, the excitement clear in her eyes despite her professional demeanor. "Everything's ready. I'm going to initialize the LRCA now." The long-range communication array was the primary reason for our descent. A revolutionary system designed to transmit acoustic signals over unprecedented distances underwater. It could potentially transform deep-sea research and naval operations alike. "Starting with minimal power at 20 Hz, Lena explained, her fingers moving methodically over her control panel. "This will give us baseline readings before we scale up." I pulled up the power management screen on my console. "Allocating power to the LRCA subsystem. You're clear to proceed." She nodded and pressed a sequence of commands. "Initiating test signal 1. There was no sound inside our cabin. The LRCA operated well below human hearing range, but I watched the power metrics carefully as the array emitted its first pulse. 20 Hz was extraordinarily low frequency, chosen specifically for its ability to travel vast distances through water with minimal degradation. Signal away, Lena confirmed, eyes fixed on her readouts. Clean transmission. No power fluctuations. I watched the energy allocation graph, ensuring our reserves remained stable. Confirmed. All systems green. Initiating test signal 2, Lena announced after making small adjustments to her equipment. Again, the invisible pulse radiated outward from our vessel, penetrating the crushing darkness around us. Second signal shows excellent propagation characteristics, she reported, satisfaction evident in her voice. Better than our simulations predicted. The external cameras showed nothing unusual, just the endless black and the drifting marine snow. But somewhere out there, our acoustic signal was traveling through the deep ocean, carrying our engineered message farther than any conventional system could manage. Initiating test signal 3, Lena said, completing the preliminary test sequence. The power draw registered on my console, a small dip in our reserves, nothing concerning. Third signal away and clean, I confirmed. All systems remain green. Lena sat back slightly, reviewing the data from the first 3 tests. Her expression was focused but pleased. The results are promising. Signal integrity is holding at 97% efficiency. That's well above projected parameters. I nodded, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. Months of design work, testing, and preparation were paying off. What's next? Now comes the real test. Lena turned to face me, her expression serious. I want to run the full power test at maximum amplitude. This will tell us if the array can handle sustained high-energy transmission. I ran the numbers mentally. That'll draw significantly more power. We'll need to reallocate from non-essential systems. Can you make it happen? She asked. I turned back to my console and began the careful process of power reallocation, shutting down non-critical systems and directing additional energy to the LRCA buffer. The submersible's lighting dimmed slightly as I rerouted power, but all essential life support and hull integrity systems remained at 100%. Allocating necessary power from our reserves, I said as I completed the adjustments. You're cleared for maximum amplitude test. I felt the vibration before anything else, a gentle tremor traveling through the submersible's hull and into my fingertips as they rested on the control panel. The LRCA discharged its signal into the surrounding water, powerful but almost elegant in its execution. The dimmed cabin lighting cast Lena's face in a soft glow as she leaned forward, intent on her displays. Signal discharge complete, I said, tracking the power consumption metrics. How's it looking? Lena didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked the data flowing across her screen, where the energy signature bloomed outward in concentric circles, pushing farther into the darkness than any of our previous tests. The visualization reminded me of ripples in a pond, except these waves carried terabytes of data through the crushing depths of the ocean floor. Signal retention is remarkably clean, she said finally, her voice tight with the controlled excitement I'd come to recognize during breakthrough moments. 98.3% integrity at maximum range. That's well beyond our projected threshold. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. 6 years of development, countless simulations, and here we were, 11 kilometers beneath the surface, watching our technology work exactly as designed. Better even. The Navy's going to... Something moved outside. I caught it in my peripheral vision. A massive shadow sliding through the darkness beyond our lights. Not marine snow or floating debris. Something big. Something alive. Did you see that? I asked, leaning toward the viewport. See what? Lena didn't look up from her instruments, fingers flying across her touchscreen as she captured the test data. I squinted, scanning the limited visibility our external lights provided. Nothing but the endless black. Maybe I'd imagined it, a trick of light on water, my eyes straining to find something interesting in the monotonous darkness. "Thought I saw movement outside," I said. "Something big." This time Lena looked up, her expression puzzled. "Big? There's nothing that size recorded at these depths. The pressure alone would..." The impact hit without warning. The submersible lurched sideways, throwing me against my restraints. Lena's tablet clattered to the floor as red warning lights flashed across my control panel, bathing the cabin in an ominous glow. "What happened?" Lena grabbed her console to steady herself. My fingers flew across the system diagnostics. "Checking damage reports now." I pulled up the external systems overview and located the damage indicator. "We've lost the external communication relay antenna. Something hit us." "That's impossible," Lena said, but her voice lacked conviction. She turned to her station and switched configurations. "Initiating active sonar." I worked the ballast controls, trying to stabilize our position. The damage to the antenna wasn't critical. We still had backup systems for surface communication, but something had physically struck our vessel nearly 7 miles beneath the ocean surface. That shouldn't be possible. "Randy." Lena's voice had changed, all scientific detachment gone. "I'm picking up multiple biological signatures." "How big?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "Massive. Size estimates exceeding 20 meters. They're..." She swallowed. "They're circling us." I checked the hull integrity readings, still at 100%. Our reinforced shell was holding. Whatever hit us had damaged the external antenna, but hadn't compromised our structural integrity. Small comfort, given what Lena was telling me. "That can't be right," I said. "Nothing that big should be able to..." The second impact made the first seem gentle. The Voyager spun violently, throwing me sideways as multiple alarms blared throughout the cabin. Warning indicators flashed across my screens. Navigation stabilizers offline. Secondary ballast system compromised. I fought with the controls, trying to maintain our position as the submersible pitched and yawed. "Hull integrity at 92%, I called out, my training kicking in despite the impossibility of what was happening. Rerouting power to stabilizers. "They're attacking us," Lena said, her voice steady despite everything. Coordinated movements, deliberate. I managed to level our position, the stabilizers whining with the effort. Through the viewport, something massive moved through the edge of our light field. For a split second I saw it clearly, an enormous jaw lined with teeth the size of my forearm, attached to a body that dwarfed our submersible. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't a giant squid. It wasn't anything I recognized from my years of marine biology study. "Oh my God," Lena whispered, staring at the viewport. Her face had gone pale. That's a Leviathan melville." I stared at her. "That's impossible. They've been extinct for millions of years." Lena shook her head, eyes wide with equal parts scientific fascination and primal fear. "Extinct or not, that's a Leviathan melville, and it shouldn't exist in these waters." I stared at the creature through the viewport, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. The Leviathan melville was massive, far larger than any living sperm whale, with a head that made up nearly a third of its body. Its jaw gaped open, revealing rows of teeth longer than my forearm. And it wasn't alone. "There's more than one," I said, my voice barely audible over the warning signals still blaring through the cabin. "Look, there." Through the murky darkness beyond our lights, massive shadows moved with deliberate precision. Their silhouettes cut through the water with an ease that seemed impossible for creatures of that size. They circled us, their movements synchronized like predators that had hunted together for millennia. "This isn't possible," I said, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "These things went extinct 12 million years ago." Lena didn't respond. Her face was locked in concentration as she worked the sonar display, her fingers dancing across the interface with practiced precision. "I'm counting at least 5 distinct biological signatures," she said, "all matching the same general profile. They're—" The rest of her sentence disappeared as something hit us. Not a physical impact like before, but a wave. A concentrated blast of sound so powerful I felt it reverberate through the hull and into my bones. The cabin lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. The control console flickered, data streams cutting in and out. What the hell was that? I gripped the edge of the console to steady myself, checking the system displays as they stabilized. Power fluctuations rippled through our grid, but the core systems held. "It's them," Lena said, her voice eerily calm despite the situation. "They're using echolocation as a weapon." She looked up from her station, her eyes meeting mine. "Randy, I think our signal, the LRCA test we just conducted, it must have appeared as a territorial challenge." I ran a quick diagnostic, watching as the results populated on my screen. "The signal strength we used, you think they interpreted it as a threat?" "These creatures evolved to use sound as both communication and weapon," she said. "What we just sent out was essentially a massive acoustic flare in their hunting ground. We might as well have shouted in their faces." Another sonic blast hit us, stronger than the first. The lights flickered more violently this time. I heard a metallic groan from outside the hull, followed by the distinctive sound of tearing metal. "External damage report," I called out, pulling up the diagnostic overlay. The schematic of our submersible appeared on my screen, with a section on the port side now flashing red. "We've lost the sample collection arm. It's completely gone." Lena's face paled even further. "That's reinforced titanium alloy. These things are using sound to shake us apart," I said, fingers flying across the controls as I initiated emergency protocols. "We need to get out of here, now." I activated the emergency ascent sequence, redirecting power to the ballast systems. The diagnostic ran, displaying our options for rapid surfacing. But instead of the green confirmation I needed, red warning symbols flashed across the screen. "No, no, no," I muttered, running the diagnostic again. The result was the same. "Main ballast system is compromised. We can't purge the tanks." The implications hit me like ice water. Without ballast control, we couldn't adjust our buoyancy. We were stuck at depth. "The impacts must have damaged the external valves," I said, my mind racing through alternatives. "We still have emergency ballast, but—" Another blast hit us, rattling everything inside the cabin. "We need to shut down the LRCA," I shouted to Lena. "Completely power it down. Maybe if we stop broadcasting, they'll back off." "I already did," she replied, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Right after the first attack. But they're still coming." She worked her console, enhancing the sonar return. "I'm counting 7 distinct individuals now, and the largest one. It's positioning itself directly beneath us." I looked down at the floor of the cabin, knowing that 11 kilometers of water separated us from the ocean floor, yet feeling suddenly exposed. What was it doing down there? The answer came a moment later. An impact from below, massive, deliberate, sent the submersible lurching upward. I was pushed down into my seat by the force, but Lena, who had been leaning forward to check a reading, was thrown violently into her console. Her head struck the edge with a sickening thud before she crumpled sideways in her restraints. "Lena!" I called out, but she didn't respond, a thin line of blood trickling from her temple. The cabin filled with the shriek of twisting metal as the pressure hull flexed beyond its design tolerances. At this depth, even the smallest breach would be catastrophic. The pressure would crush us in milliseconds. I knew that sound. I'd heard it during test dives when we'd pushed prototype hulls to failure, but I'd never heard it inside a manned vessel. It was the sound of approaching death. Our external lights sputtered, power fluctuating as the attacks continued. But in those flashing moments of illumination, I saw them clearly. 7 massive prehistoric predators, their enormous bodies circling our crippled vessel, their tooth-filled jaws larger than car doors. The largest one, easily 25 meters long, rose from below, its eye the size of a dinner plate fixing on our viewport as it opened its mouth to reveal a cavern of teeth that could crush our hull like an egg. I frantically checked the system readouts as another focused sonar attack slammed into our hull. The internal pressure gauge flickered between normal and critical. 6 warning lights blazed across the main console. We were losing integrity fast. Lena, can you give me a location on the hull groaned, a low, terrible noise that reminded me of ice breaking on a frozen lake, except 1,000 times louder. The metal wasn't just bending, it was reaching its breaking point. They're coordinating, Lena said, her voice strained but clinical. The attacks are coming from... A thunderous crack cut her off. The starboard external panel, the one housing our auxiliary power conduits, suddenly buckled inward with a sickening crunch. The reinforced metal tore like paper as the immense pressure outside finally found a weak point. The implosion created a deadly chain reaction. A section of internal bracing snapped free, transformed instantly into a spear-like projectile. It shot across the cabin faster than I could track. Then a wet thud, a choked gasp. When I looked up, the metal shard had pinned Lena against the bulkhead. It jutted from her chest, directly below her sternum. Her white jumpsuit bloomed with red, spreading outward in a rapidly growing stain. No! I lunged toward her, forgetting my restraints. The harness yanked me back into my seat. I fumbled with the release catch, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Lena's eyes found mine. They were clear, focused, the look of someone making calculations even now. Her mouth worked silently for a moment before she found her voice. "Randy," she whispered. "My research, the recordings." Her right hand lifted slightly, trembling with effort as she gestured weakly toward her workstation. "Hang on, Bev. Just hang on." I finally freed myself from the restraints and pushed across the tilting cabin floor. "We'll get out of this." But when I reached her, her hand fell limp against her side. Her eyes stared past me, fixed on something I couldn't see. I wanted to check for a pulse. I wanted to try CPR. I wanted to scream at her to stay with me. There wasn't time for any of it. A shadow passed over the viewport, massive and prehistoric. The largest of the creatures positioned itself directly beneath us. Through the flickering external lights, I watched its jaws part. The mouth that opened below us was large enough to swallow our entire vessel in one bite. My mind raced. What had Lena been trying to tell me? Her research, recordings. It clicked. The bioacoustic data collection. The entire reason Christina had asked us to bring the upgraded hydrophones. Lena had been cataloging and analyzing cetacean vocalizations for years. If these creatures were some kind of prehistoric whale relatives, then maybe... I scrambled back to her workstation. The terminal was still active, the screen filled with waveform analyses from the LRCA test. I minimized the display and navigated to her personal research folders. The submersible lurched violently as another impact struck us from behind. A new series of alarms wailed. Oxygen recirculation failing. Primary power dropping to 30%. Come on. Come on. I muttered, scanning through folder after folder of research data. Calibration tests, signal propagation models, mammalian communication patterns. Then I saw it. Juvenile distress calls. The metal around me groaned again. longer and deeper. Tiny jets of pressurized air hissed from seams that were never meant to separate. We had minutes, maybe less. The creature below opened its jaws wider, its eye, intelligent and ancient, fixed on our vessel. I had no idea if what I was about to do would save us or just make things worse, but it was our only option. I clicked the folder and reached for the external broadcast controls, preparing to use the recordings as our last hope, while the submersible creaked ominously around me, threatening to collapse at any moment. I clicked on the folder labeled Juvenile Distress Calls and fumbled with the external broadcast controls. My fingers slipped twice before I managed to route the audio file to the external speakers. Lena's research indicated these massive creatures were social mammals with complex family structures. If they were anything like modern whales, they'd respond instinctively to a baby's cry for help. "Please work," I muttered as I adjusted the playback settings. I cranked the volume to maximum and tweaked the frequency modulator, pushing the pitch higher to create a more electronic, distorted quality. The original recording already captured the agonizing sound of what Lena had theorized was a Leviathan calf separated from its pod. My modifications made it sound more urgent, more desperate. When I hit play, I felt a vibration through the console as the sound blasted through our external speakers. The noise filled the cabin too, a haunting, primal wail that made my skin tighten. It wasn't just loud, it was piercing in a way that bypassed rational thought and went straight to instinct. Through the viewport, I watched the effect on the matriarch. The massive creature halted its attack mid-charge, its enormous form shuddering in the beam of our one remaining exterior light. Its body language changed instantly, from predatory aggression to what looked like alarm. Its massive eye, fixed on our viewport just moments ago with what I'd swear was calculated malice, now darted back and forth, searching the darkness. "It's working," I whispered to myself, hardly daring to believe it. The other creatures responded too. They broke off their coordinated assault, their massive forms scattering in confused, frantic patterns. They began emitting their own calls, lower, more resonant sounds that I could feel through the hull of our vessel. The water around us seemed to vibrate with their vocalizations. This was my chance. Maybe our only chance. I lunged back to the main control panel, my hands flying across the emergency protocols. We couldn't use the main ballast system. It was too damaged. But the emergency backup was designed to function even with partial systems failure. I redirected all remaining power away from non-essential functions. Cabin temperature regulation, secondary life support, external cameras, all shut down to give the emergency ballast everything it had. "Come on, come on," I urged the system as the power transfer initialized. The damaged submersible jerked violently as the emergency ballast engaged. The sudden movement slammed me back into my seat. A new alarm joined the cacophony, hull stress warnings as our ascent began. But we were moving upward. I could see it on the depth gauge, the numbers slowly decreasing. We were rising, leaving the confused prehistoric predators circling in the darkness below us. I had to stay focused. I couldn't let myself think about what just happened, what we'd discovered, or what it meant. All that mattered now was staying alive long enough to tell someone about it. The hull groaned around me, a deep, resonant sound of metal under strain. The pressure changes during ascent would be just as dangerous as the descent. More dangerous, actually, with our compromised structural integrity. I kept my eyes on the system readouts, making constant micro-adjustments. Too fast an ascent would crush us as surely as staying down there would have. Too slow, and we might not make it before life support failed completely. "Adjusting ascent rate," I said aloud, even though there was no one to hear me. "Redistributing pressure load to intact hull segments. Every 200 meters required recalibration." The groaning sounds changed pitch as we rose, sometimes quieting briefly, before returning with new urgency. I worked the controls continuously, fingers never still, mind calculating and adjusting. During a momentary stabilization at 3,000 meters, I allowed myself to look at Lena. She hadn't moved. The metal shard still protruded from her chest, and the blood around her had stopped flowing. Her skin had a gray cast to it now. I reached across and pressed my fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse I knew wouldn't be there. Nothing. She was gone. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. I turned back to the controls. Grief would have to wait. 8,000 more meters of ocean pressed down on us, and the submersible was creaking ominously with each passing minute. I focused all my remaining efforts on the ascent procedures, on keeping myself alive during the treacherous journey through different pressure zones that could still crush the damaged vessel. The creaking intensified as I guided the Abyss Voyager upward, each groan of metal stretching my nerves thinner. 8,000 meters of ocean pressed down on us with incomprehensible force, searching for any weakness in our damaged hull. I kept my eyes locked on the depth readout, watching the numbers tick upward with agonizing slowness. 7,956, 7,943, 7,921. Every 30 seconds, I ran a new diagnostic, reassigning power between critical systems in a desperate balancing act. The primary oxygen recycler was drawing more energy than it should. I pulled 20% from the external lighting and rerouted it, watching anxiously as the oxygen levels stabilized. We wouldn't need those lights anyway, not anymore. "Come on," I muttered to the vessel. "Just hold together a little longer." The main viewport was directly in front of me, a thick circle of transparent ceramic compound designed to withstand pressures that would crush a conventional submarine like an empty soda can. Through it, I could see nothing but black water. Lena's body lay behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to look back at her. Not yet. I tapped the manual depth indicator, checking it against the digital readout. The old-school analog gauge was a backup that couldn't be affected by power fluctuations or system glitches. Both showed we were approaching 7,000 meters. The pressure differential was easing, but not enough to relax. This zone was particularly dangerous. Changing pressures could stress the already compromised hull in unpredictable ways. A new sound cut through the constant background noise, a high-pitched whistling near the port side of the main viewport. I snapped my attention toward it and felt my stomach drop. A hairline crack had formed where the viewport joined the hull, and water was beginning to seep through. It wasn't much yet, just a glistening line of moisture, but it would worsen as the pressure differentials shifted during our ascent. No. I unbuckled from my seat and launched myself toward the emergency kit mounted on the wall. My legs felt weak, unsteady. How long had it been since I'd stood up? Hours, at least. I yanked the kit open and grabbed the tube of emergency hull sealant, designed specifically for deep-sea repair. The manufacturers had assured us it could maintain integrity up to 10,000 meters. We were about to test that claim. My hands shook as I applied the thick, putty-like substance to the seeping crack. It felt warm to the touch, already beginning its chemical reaction with the water. I spread it carefully along the entire seam, making sure to cover a few inches beyond where I could see the actual leak. Water continued to bubble through for a few seconds, then slowed, and finally stopped as the compound hardened. I returned to the controls, checking our status. We were passing through 6,900 meters now. The patch would hold for a while, but for how long? I adjusted our ascent rate, slowing it slightly to reduce stress on the hull. We couldn't risk another breach, but we also couldn't stay down here forever. Our power reserves were draining faster than anticipated. The next hour passed in a haze of constant adjustments and diagnostics. I spoke to the vessel as if it could hear me, pleading with it to hold together, to get us home. At some point, I realized I was talking to keep myself from screaming. As we passed 5,200 meters, I allowed myself to look at Lena's station. Her research terminal was still on, screen glowing with the data she'd been collecting right up until... I closed my eyes for a moment. I couldn't think about that now. But her data, the recordings of those creatures, her analysis, it might be the only evidence of what we'd discovered. What had killed her? I moved to her workstation, careful not to look directly at her body. The ship's motion had shifted her slightly, and the metal shard that had... I forced myself to focus on the screen. Her login was still active, the folders of data still open. I found an empty data drive in the storage compartment beside her station and connected it to the terminal. "Begin data transfer," I said aloud, more to fill the silence than anything else. The screen displayed a progress bar. I selected the sonar recordings first. They were the most crucial evidence of what we'd encountered. Then her preliminary analysis files, her notes, everything that might help explain what had happened. While the files transferred, I returned to my station and checked the radar. I'd been doing this every few minutes since we began our ascent, dreading what I might see. The massive shapes of those creatures following us up from the depths. But the radar showed nothing unusual. Just the empty ocean around us. Had they given up the chase? Or had the distress call actually worked as I hoped, convincing them we weren't a threat? The data transfer completed with a soft chime from Lena's terminal. I disconnected the drive and tucked it securely into my jumpsuit pocket, patting it twice to make sure it was safe. This drive now contained possibly the most important scientific discovery of the century, living prehistoric megafauna thought to be extinct for millions of years, and it had cost Lena her life. We passed 4,800 meters, entering what oceanographers called the mesopelagic zone. The crushing darkness outside began to soften almost imperceptibly, shifting from absolute black to the faintest hint of navy blue. In a few hundred more meters, we'd start to see the dim, filtering light from the surface. For the first time since the attack, I felt something loosen in my chest, a tiny spark of hope. We might actually make it. I looked at the oxygen reserves. 47%. Power levels, 38%. Enough to reach the surface if nothing else went wrong. The hull integrity indicators showed stress points throughout the structure, but nothing immediately catastrophic. The emergency sealant on the viewport was holding. My gaze finally turned to Lena. I couldn't avoid it any longer. She deserved better than to be ignored in her final moments. Her body was slumped against the bulkhead, the metal shard still protruding from her chest. Blood had spread across her jumpsuit and dried to a dark brown. Her eyes were still open, staring at nothing. With reverence, I moved toward her. "I'm going to take care of you, Lena," I said softly. I reached for the emergency kit again, this time retrieving the silver thermal blanket stored in its side pocket. With gentle movements, I unfolded it and carefully covered her body, leaving her face exposed for now. I couldn't bring myself to close her eyes yet. "I'll make sure they know what you found," I promised her. "What happened down there? Your research won't be forgotten." A harsh electronic tone interrupted the moment, the power management system warning me of critical drain. I returned to the control panel and saw battery levels had suddenly dropped to 29%. Something was drawing extra power. I pulled up the distribution schematic and saw the culprit. The thermal regulation system was working overtime to compensate for a sensor malfunction. I had a choice to make. We needed that battery power to complete our ascent, but shutting down thermal regulation could make the cabin temperature plummet. Looking at the remaining systems, I knew what I had to do. "Sorry about this," I muttered, then began the process of shutting down every non-essential system. External sensors offline. Cabin lighting reduced to 20%. Communications array offline. We were too deep for it to work anyway. Environmental controls reduced to minimum life support. Scientific instruments offline. Even the radar I'd been checking offline. I redirected all the freed up energy to the ascent systems, the ballast controls, the vertical thrusters, the pressure compensation mechanisms. The battery level stabilized at 26%, then began to decline more slowly. It would be enough. It had to be enough. In the dimmed lighting of the cabin, with the creaking hull around me and Lena's blanket-covered body behind me, I focused entirely on the controls, on the depth readings, on the single task of keeping the damaged vessel ascending steadily through the water column. I made the difficult decision to prioritize survival above all else. My ears popped with a sharp stab of pain. I winced, working my jaw to try to equalize the pressure as the Abyss Voyager continued its desperate climb through the water column. We'd crossed into the final 1,000 meters, where pressure differentials hit hardest. The pain was actually reassuring, physical proof we were getting closer to the surface. After nearly 12 hours of fighting this damaged vessel upward through crushing depths, each meter gained felt like a personal victory. I checked the depth gauge, 862 meters and climbing. Not fast enough, but moving. The battery indicator had dropped to 18%, down from the 26 I'd stabilized earlier. The life support systems were consuming power at an unsustainable rate. Looking up from the control panel, I noticed something I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. Light. Not the harsh artificial beams of our external floods, but a soft, diffuse glow from above. Sunlight, filtering down through hundreds of meters of water, growing stronger with each passing minute. It hit me like a physical thing. We were getting close enough to the surface for natural light to reach us. "Almost there," I said to the empty cabin, to Lena's blanket-covered form behind me. The control panel chirped an alert. I looked down to see the power reserves indicator flash red, dropping to 12%. Critical levels. The system management console showed a cascade of failures initiating, non-essential systems shutting down to preserve core functions. The automated voice announced what I already knew. "Warning, critical power failure. Emergency protocols activated." The environmental controls died first, followed by the external cameras. The cabin lights dimmed to emergency levels, bathing everything in a sickly amber glow. The digital displays flickered, some going dark entirely. I grabbed the manual controls, wrapping my hands around the physical backup systems, old-school hydraulic levers that could operate the ballast tanks and rudimentary ascent mechanisms directly. No computer assistance, no power augmentation, just raw mechanical advantage. "Come on," I muttered, pulling back on the primary ascent lever. It fought me, stiff from disuse. My shoulders burned with the effort, but I felt the mechanism engage. The ascent rate ticked up from 2 meters per minute to 3. A loud bang echoed through the cabin, followed by a high-pitched hissing sound. My stomach dropped. I knew that sound. The sound of pressurized water finding a new entry point. I spun in my seat, scanning the cabin for the source. There, in the back wall, the equipment bay access panel was buckling inward, water spraying in through a crack along its lower edge. The leak was worse than the earlier viewport crack I'd sealed. Much worse. The emergency pumps kicked in automatically, but I could tell immediately they weren't keeping up. Water pooled on the cabin floor, spreading rapidly. No. I ran the math in my head. At this rate of water ingress, with the pumps struggling to keep up, The cabin would fill past the critical electrical systems in less than 10 minutes. We'd lose power completely. And at our current ascent rate, we were still 20 minutes from the surface. I'd drown in this metal coffin with Lena unless I sealed that breach. Unbuckling from my seat, I stood and immediately felt the cold water around my ankles. The floor pitched as the submersible continued its uneven ascent, making it hard to keep my balance. I grabbed handholds along the wall, making my way to the emergency equipment locker. The cabinet door was jammed. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice, and on the third try it popped open, spilling its contents. The emergency patch kit tumbled into the rising water. I snatched it up, pulling out the pressure seals, adhesive patches designed to temporarily hold against moderate water pressure. Wading through the ankle-deep water, I reached the equipment bay door. The spray hit me directly in the face, making it hard to see. The water was ice cold, numbing my skin instantly. My hands shook from cold, from fear, from exhaustion as I tore open the first patch. The water pressure fought me as I tried to position it over the worst part of the breach. The first patch slipped from my fingers, carried away by the spray. Damn it. I fumbled for another one, pressing it against the metal with all my strength, holding it there as the adhesive activated. Water still seeped around its edges, but the main spray reduced. I slapped a second patch overlapping the first, then a third beside it. My teeth chattered as I worked. The cold water now reached halfway up my calves. The patches wouldn't hold for long. They weren't designed for this kind of pressure or structural damage. But they might buy enough time. I sloshed back to the control station, water now reaching my knees, making each step a battle against both the rising flood and the pitching deck. The control panel displayed power at 7%. The depth gauge showed 640 meters. We were running out of options. Standard protocols dictated a safe ascent rate to avoid structural damage, but those rules assumed an intact vessel. The Abyss Voyager was far past that point. I reached beneath the control panel, finding the emergency override switch. It was sealed with a plastic guard, a final warning to operators about the dangers of what I was about to do. I snapped it off and flipped the switch. Emergency ascent override engaged, I confirmed to myself, then began inputting the bypass sequence on the keypad. Override authorization, Hudson, Randy, confirmation code 8437 Alpha. The console beeped in acknowledgement. New controls unlocked on the screen, options that had been hidden behind safety protocols. I maximized the emergency ballast release, directing all remaining power to the ascent systems. To hell with the safety margins. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The Voyager lurched upward at a speed it was never designed to handle. The hull protested with deep, resonating groans that vibrated through the entire structure. Metal stressed beyond its limits, compressed for hours under extreme pressure, now forced to rapidly adjust to changing conditions. Water continued to rise in the cabin despite the patches. It splashed around my thighs now, soaking through my jumpsuit, chilling me to the bone. The control panel flickered as water reached dangerous heights for the electronics. I checked the power, 4%. Depth, 380 meters. It would be close. Too close. I reached for the emergency beacon control, our last communication option. If we made it to the surface, we'd need immediate rescue. The beacon would broadcast our position to the support vessel, assuming it was still in the area. Activating emergency beacon, I said, pressing the button. A single green light confirmed it was working. The overhead lights cut out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by the emergency floor strips and the glow from the surface light filtering down through the viewport. The control panel went dead a moment later. 3% power. All systems shutting down to preserve the final energy reserves for the ascent mechanisms. The cabin was silent, except for the splash of water and the ominous creaking of the hull. I held onto the console, bracing myself as the Voyager continued its desperate climb. 200 meters, 150. The groaning of the hull intensified to a scream of metal. The patches on the equipment bay gave way, sending a fresh spray of water into the cabin. But it didn't matter now. We were almost there. I looked up at the viewport, seeing the surface light growing brighter by the second. 50 meters, 25. The final system failures cascaded across what remained of the active displays. The ascent mechanism gave a last push with whatever power remained in the emergency cells. Then, with a violent upward lurch that nearly threw me from my feet, the Abyss Voyager breached the surface. Sunlight, pure, unfiltered, glorious sunlight, flooded through the viewport, momentarily blinding me after so many hours in the dimly lit depths. I stared at Lena's motionless form, my mind empty of anything but the dull roar of water sloshing against the submersible's hull. The thermal blanket still covered her body, but had slipped from her face during our violent ascent. Her eyes were closed now. I must have done that at some point, though I couldn't remember when. The cabin rocked back and forth in a gentle, almost peaceful rhythm that felt obscene given what had happened 11 kilometers below. Sunlight streamed through the viewport, harsh and blinding after so many hours in darkness. I blinked against it, my eyes watering. Whether from the light or everything else, I couldn't tell. The water inside the cabin had stopped rising after reaching my thighs, leaving everything above that waterline dripping and glistening in the morning sun. A flash of movement outside caught my attention. I turned away from Lena and squinted through the cracked viewport. Research vessels. 3 of them cutting white wakes across the blue water as they raced toward our position. The emergency beacon had worked. Someone had heard us. I took my first full breath since we'd surfaced. My hand went to the pocket of my soaked jumpsuit, fingers finding the hard outline of the data drive. It contained everything: our descent logs, Lena's acoustic research, and most importantly, the recordings of creatures that defied scientific understanding. Leviathan melvillae. Creatures that should have been extinct for millions of years, yet had attacked us with terrifying intelligence. And the sounds that had saved my life, the distress calls Lena had theorized might affect their behavior. She'd been right. The knowledge had cost her everything. The closest vessel was close enough now that I could read its name on the hull. Oceanographic Support 3. Standard Research Support Vessel. I recognized the silhouettes of people rushing about on deck, preparing for rescue operations. The comforting sight of human activity after hours of isolation made my throat tighten. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. How long had I been sitting here, staring at Lena? Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning. The cabin suddenly filled with the harsh mechanical sound of someone working at the external hatch. Metal scraping against metal. Voices calling from outside. "Stand back from the hatch," a voice shouted, muffled through the hull. I backed away as much as the flooded cabin would allow. The circular hatch above groaned, then popped with a rush of fresh air. Sunlight poured in from directly above, and with it, the face of Donnie Garcia peering down. "Randy, can you hear me?" Donnie called, his medical kit already slung over his shoulder. "Yes," I said, my voice a rasp. Donnie was already halfway down the ladder, not waiting for further confirmation. 2 other med-techs followed close behind him, their movements quick and practiced. Donnie splashed into the water beside me, his hands immediately going to my face, checking my pupils with a penlight. "Possible hypoxia, mild hypothermia," he called to his team. "Get a thermal blanket ready topside." His hands moved efficiently, checking my pulse, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation. I let him work, too numb to resist. "Lena," I managed to say, gesturing weakly toward her body. Donnie looked over his shoulder, his expression shifting as he took in the scene. He waded through the water to her side, checking for vital signs I knew he wouldn't find. The other med techs watched, their faces grim. "Time of death unknown," Donnie said quietly, looking back at me with professional compassion. "I'm sorry, Randy." I nodded, the reality of it all still not fully registering. "Can you climb?" Donnie asked, returning to my side. "We need to get you out of here." "Yes," I said, though I wasn't sure. With Donnie's help, I made it up the ladder, emerging into the blinding sunlight of the open ocean. Hands reached for me, pulling me onto the deck of what I now recognized as a fast response craft. Moments later, we were speeding toward the larger research vessel. I sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, staring at nothing as the medical team continued their assessment. The drive in my pocket pressed against my leg, a constant reminder. "Randy." I looked up to see James standing over me, concern etched across his weathered face. "What happened down there?" he asked, his voice low and serious. My hand moved to my pocket without conscious thought. I pulled out the data drive, now sealed in a waterproof container I didn't remember placing it in. My fingers shook as I held it out to him. "We woke something," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Something that was better left sleeping." James took the drive, his expression questioning. "Everything's on there," I continued. "The descent logs, Lena's research, and what we found. What found us." I swallowed hard. "They're down there, James. Living fossils. Megafauna thought extinct for millions of years. And our signals, they took it as a threat." James stared at the drive in his hand, then back at me. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we need to be careful," I cut him off. "Very careful about what we broadcast into the deep. They're listening." By the time we reached the Horizon Pioneer, the main research vessel, Lena's body had been recovered and respectfully transported. The damaged submersible, the Abyss Voyager, our technological marvel, was being secured to the stern with heavy cables and winches. Its sleek form, once pristine, now bore the scars of our encounter. Twisted metal, missing external components, and the hairline fractures that had nearly been our undoing. I stood at the railing of the main deck, watching the recovery operation with detached interest. The water lapped against the hull below, peaceful and blue. No hint of the darkness 11 kilometers down. No sign of the ancient terror lurking in those depths. But I knew they were there. The Leviathan, swimming in confused patterns, searching for a calf that would never be found. The distress call that had saved me had also tricked them, manipulated them, used their own instincts against them. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest. I alone had survived to tell their tale. I alone carried the burden of what humanity's technological ambitions had awakened in the deepest part of the ocean.